OutdoorKZ team is going on a journey along the Kapchagai-Balkhash ecological corridor. Our expedition will start at AltYn-EmEl National Park. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that AltYn-EmEl is the most recognizable nature tourism site in Almaty region. 2-3 hours by car from Almaty and you find yourself in one of the most picturesque places on the planet. Both Kazakhstan residents and our foreign guests willingly go to AltYn-EmEl to admire the bizarre geological history masterpieces. These fantastic landscapes seem to have attracted people since deep antiquity, as the park's territory hosts hundreds of archaeological monuments. Along the way, everybody has a chance to see kulans and black-tailed or goited gazelles. Going up into the mountains, you can even see mountain goats or teke. Each country has its own peculiarities when it comes to establishing conservation networks. In any case, the goal of creating such networks is to ensure legal, social and economical conditions for preserving entire ecosystems and at the same time allowing local residents to develop economically without hurting the nature. According to rock engravings, in the old days, the Sholak and AltYn-EmEl mountains were a hunting paradise. AltYn-EmEl translates from Mongolian as the Golden Saddle. As the legend has it, Genghis Khan gave it its name. Having seen the valley from the pass, he was struck by its beauty and abundance of animals.
Первые особо охраняемые территории появились еще в средние века.
The first specially protected areas appeared in the Middle Ages. It was done by the then rulers who prohibited hunting and logging in their hunting grounds. Thanks to them, Europe can boast of relict oak groves that exist only within the limits of the hunting grounds of German emperors. There is a legend that Genghis Khan also enforced the hunting rules, prohibiting pursuing game animals in the mountains. In the plains, they organized grandiose battues, but if animals managed to get to the mountains, nobody followed them, although it might be just a legend. Kulans and goited gazelles represent the two trademarks of the national park. The last state counting mission identified 4,000 gazelles and 3,500 kulans or wild horses. In the early Middle Ages, there were many kulans in the steppes and foothills of Almaty region, but by the late 19th century, their Kazakhstan subspecies was completely destroyed. In 1982, they brought in Turkmen kulans. At present, they are resettling them from AltYn-EmEl throughout Kazakhstan. Southern Balkhash region represents one of the priority areas of relocating kulans, where active efforts to expand the ungulate populations are underway within the framework of the project for the Balkhash tiger recruitment. Strictly protected nature areas like reserves and national parks occupy only a few % of the country's territory. The rest of the territory of conservation networks is occupied by various eco-corridors, wildlife sanctuaries and other forms of protected sites where economic activities are allowed. The main task of conservation networks is to create conditions so that local residents want to preserve their nature. In 2006, the World Wildlife Fund brought together over 400 experts and designed the EcoNet, an integrated conservation network for 5 Central Asian countries supported by all target states. Later on in Kazakhstan, for example, UNDP developed the concept for conservation and sustainable development of biological diversity in the Republic of Kazakhstan until 2030, which includes plans to advance the conservation network. The AltYn-EmEl Balkhash eco-corridor is the most striking example in Almaty region. At present, AltYn-EmEl has a high number of gazelles and kulans. We need to create conditions for animals to spread and reach Lake Balkhash. This is what we are currently working on. The area of the eco-corridor is 930,000 hectares. Construction of industrial facilities and new roads is prohibited here. Linear infrastructure is the main obstacle to wild animal migrations, especially fenced-off, high-speed highways. The Almaty-Taldykorgan highway crosses the Kapchagai-Balkhash ecological corridor. Today, a group of environmentalists is working on an eco-duct or a wildlife crossing project, an engineered installation allowing animals to cross roads. An alternative idea is to simply limit the allowed vehicle speed and remove the fence in the animal crossing area instead of building the eco-duct. In the north, the low hills of Malai Sari merge into the Sari-Yasik-Atirau Desert. The Ili River snakes out in the east. All communities and farms are concentrated along the river. Sharip Yesayev, head of the Ile-Balkhash Reserve Protection Unit, invites the OutdoorKZ team to his farm, which looks more like a zoo. Guinea fowl, Mongolian pheasants, wild ducks, you name it. Breeding wild animals in captivity is called ranching. It has become a popular type of agricultural business. In the past, the Ili River used to freeze in the second half of November, but in the course of the last 10 to 15 years, the freezing period has shifted a whole month. There are years when the Ili doesn't freeze over at all. It might be one of the climate change impacts. In any case, now the Ili, as they say, is neither water nor ice. As soon as it gets dark, the patrol team goes to the steppe. Their raid's main mission is to protect the endangered gazelles. Poachers may hunt at night, and that's why we are doing our raid at night. We have night vision devices. The inspectors split into two groups. The team lead is coordinating the actions of the task forces via radio, telling them where to go to block the potential escape routes for poachers. The steppe is huge, so the inspectors rely on reliable equipment and trusted companions. I have been working at the Ile-Balkhash Reserve for 1 year. Our duty posts are Kores and Karamegan checkpoints. I took this job because I want to preserve the wildlife of my district. Natural reserves differ from wildlife reserves due to the fact that all types of activities are prohibited in the latter. We are engaging with the local population to develop tourism. The residents of Karaoy village receive small grants from the UN Development Program as well as the World Wildlife Fund. It is difficult to control the vast territory of the eco-corridor using only administrative methods. Therefore, the inspectors are trying to get a buy-in from local communities. Yet, not everyone is concerned with nature conservation. It is necessary to fight for the minds and hearts of local residents, instilling love for native nature from childhood. In the steppe, there are monuments to people that hunted gazelles. At the pedestals, instead of flowers, there are casings and shot shells. Everyone who passes by leaves something. As far as I can judge, it's mostly casings. Yes, of different gauges, already old and rusty. These are the monuments to the hunters of the past. Do you see gazelle tracks? And here are the casings and cartridges. The paramount task of the park rangers is changing people's attitude towards poaching. The group is heading towards the ancient fortress of Akhtam. First it will be Akhtam, and then there will be another fortress, and another one. And then we will reach Lake Balkhash, where the Silk Road passed. The Sari-Yasik Atirau Desert. Endless sands, salt marshes, dry-type playa and saxaul woods. They play an extremely important ecological role in the life of desert. Animals feed on green saxaul offshoots. This plant has a powerful root system capable of lifting water from the depth exceeding 10 meters. In the old days, the Kazakh masters of building wells, or kudek-sheber, enjoyed great respect among the people. Contrary to the common myth, they determined the depth of groundwater not by means of grapevine, but by the location and shape of saxaul bushes. Where the water was close to the surface, saxaul trees would be particularly big. This is one of the channel's spurs, and it flows by the fortress. Do you notice how strong the saxaul along it is? To date, over 2 billion hectares of productive land have already degraded due to human activities. This issue is particularly acute in countries with arid climate. At present, about 14 million hectares have been withdrawn from the total of 182 million hectares of pasture land in Kazakhstan as a result of desertification. In the past, saxaul forest had suffered significant damage, but now saxaul harvesting is completely prohibited and forestry workers plant thousands of saxaul bushes every year. The Agdala irrigation massive was built in the 70s of the last century. It's the northernmost region of rice farming in the world. It uses 1.2 cubic kilometers of irrigation water, from which only 0.3 cubic meters go back to the Joly River. Rice bays are located high above the river, on the ancient upland fringe, so in order to grow rice at Agdala, they had to create an extremely high groundwater dome. Its artificial maintenance consumes most of the water. Gradually, salt accumulates in the soil, and its washing takes even more water. Previously, wintering sites and alpine meadows used by pastoralists were evenly distributed across the steppe. Today, farmers do not want to live far from modern infrastructure and utilities. We have been crossing the Sari-Yasik Atirau Desert for the second day already and haven't met a single person. Looking at this barren land, it's hard to imagine that once it was covered with green gardens and lush fields. There is a common misperception that the medieval population of the Jatusu land was engaged exclusively in nomadic cattle breeding. That's not completely so. They also did farming, conventional cattle breeding. There were urban as well as craft populations. They exchanged goods. The Aktam fortress, where we are right now, is one of the evidences of that. There are lots of ceramic bits around, of thick-walled jugs. It's not clear what it was. It might have been a pot. Look how many of them there are. Three fortresses, Aktam, Agashayak and Karamegen, are located at the distance of a one-day journey, or about 50 kilometers from each other. This is the Aktam fortress. Archaeologists believe that it appeared in the 9th century AD and was destroyed during the Mongolian invasion in the 13th century. The Great Silk Road had existed for almost 1500 years, but it doesn't mean that it operated continuously and non-stop all through this time. The Silk Road flourished when the steppe was controlled by strong states and went into decline during wars and unrest. At the fortress corners, there were towers. And this opening here might have been the main gate. This object looks processed. Perhaps a fortress defender once used this grindstone to sharpen his saber before the battle. The surface is polished. Somebody used it to sharpen a sword. This is one of the small channels of the ancient delta. The ancient people apparently withdrew the water to Akhtam from here. These here are the traces of another historical era. Stewed meat. It was probably an expedition camp. What is this here? Can it be? It's barbells. Genghis Khan's barbells. I got it. We need to cut them open and we will find the Genghis Khan's treasure inside. We need a hacksaw to cut these barbells. Wow, Genghis Khan was a tough guy. From the Akhtam fortress, the expedition is heading towards Karami again. Along the way, the raid team details the gazelle population and inspects the abandoned wells. These wells were built in Soviet times, in the 60s and even 50s. They used them for free-range animal husbandry. The reserve's science department and the consultants of the World Wildlife Fund and International Union for Conservation of Nature observe gazelles in different seasons of the year to understand the structure of their seasonal migrations. In winter, you can encounter gazelles anywhere in the steppe. In summer, they are tied to water bodies. Thus, wells are very important for them. These wells have remained since the Soviet time and have not been operating for decades. One of the current tasks for conservationists is to restore the wells along the Kapchagai-Balkhash ecological corridor. There are dozens of them. Hundreds of thousands of hectares of desert land can become excellent habitats for wild animals. There are no concern factors around these wells, no settlements and no highways in proximity. Photographers usually take images of gazelles running away. Hence, the public gets the impression that gazelles are constantly galloping across the desert, overtaking motorized vehicles with their heads proudly upright. Many people believe that it's trifles for them to run 100 kilometers to the nearest water body. In fact, like all desert animals, goited gazelles are very economical as to consuming moisture and energy. They run only in case of extreme danger. Usually in summer, these graceful ungulates roam within a 15-kilometer radius from a nearby drinking point. Where there is water and nobody's hunting them, they rapidly grow in numbers. Last year, we counted 78 heads at the Salt Gardens near the coast. The gazelle scared by our truck leaves us no time for a photo shoot. We have already seen 32 of them, but only twice managed to take a picture of their black tails flashing in the thickets. We decide to change our tactics and go on foot. 3 trails cross here. I see some fresh gazelle tracks. They might be coming here for salt, as there is a salt lake nearby. Let's check it out. I read the notes by a Tiflis zoologist who once worked in Central Asia. He said that in just 1 hour he counted 1,000 gazelles. Before entering the Red Book, the gazelle population was subject to extreme exploitation. An interesting historical fact. In the year of 1870-something, one packer team harvested 7,000 gazelle skins. That was the time when they actively traded gazelle skins. Until very recently, gazelle habitat in Kazakhstan continuously stretched from the Caspian Sea to Lake Zaysan. Now it has fragmented into several groups. The task of conservationists is to create eco-corridors via which isolated animal groups could communicate with each other and exchange their genes. A female gazelle reaches puberty during the first year of life and a male one only during the second. Young females can bring 1 or 2 babies, adult ones often give birth to 3 or even 4 cubs. The first attempts to systematically determine the number of gazelles in Kazakhstan took place in the 30s of the last century. Then zoologists estimated the total Kazakhstan's gazelle population to reach 200,000 animals. Yet already in the 90s it dropped down to 10,000. After Kazakhstan gained independence, it slightly increased. Now it's about 12,000 heads. Every year it adds 100 to 200 animals. And it's not enough, of course. Look at all these tracks. They trampled the whole coast. These are gazelle tracks, and these are boar tracks. Ecologists have estimated that desert pastures are able to feed 5 times as many gazelles as domestic sheep. Over thousands of years, wild animals have developed a sophisticated social and territorial behavior system, allowing them to evenly distribute the pasture load. Domestic animals, on the contrary, graze in one place and quickly destroy the grazing area. In summer, goited gazelles are brown-yellow. In winter, their color grows lighter and turns gray. Young animals differ from mature ones by the 2 lines connecting the corner of the mouth and the nose. Some semi-destroyed walls whiten at the steppe crossroads. What is it? Another fortress? No, it's a monument of a later era. These are the ruins of an old anti-plague hospital. Do you see how thick the adobe walls are? It was built in the 30s. In the early 14th century, a big trouble was born here in the steppes of Central Asia. It was called the Black Death. In just 20 years, the plague epidemic reached the Atlantic coast and killed off about 2 million people. At that time, it was a quarter of Eurasia's population. It's obvious that the Great Silk Road transmitted not only useful knowledge and goods. The plague epidemic was caused by the Yersinia pestis bacteria that lived in a flea, which, in its turn, on a great gerbil. Here in the middle of the Sari-Yesik-Atarau desert live huge colonies of these animals. For 70 years, our anti-plague unit zoologists have been studying them. Of course, in those days, no one could have thought that the cause of the terrible disaster was invisible to the human eye. A bacteria that hid in a flea on a mouse in an unknown Central Asia, where none of the Europeans have ever been to. They tried fighting the plague epidemic by collective prayers, which, of course, facilitated its further distribution. We are leaving the ancient settlement of Agashayk left of us, heading for the Karamegan fortress. At times our trucks tear their way through thick Saksaul forests, at times their wheels spin in the sand, at times they almost fly along the flat and asphalt-like shats. The fortress of Karamegan, the northernmost outpost of the Great Silk Road, is located 3 kilometers away from the merger of the dry beds of the Shat-Bakhash and Otasu rivers. When and why did the Ili River change its course? The core hypothesis alleges that the river bed shifted 200 kilometers to the east for natural reasons. The muddy river water carried sand and silt down from the mountains, which had been accumulating for centuries at the river mouth. Eventually, a fertile alluvial cone rose over the surrounding plain, blocking the water that found itself another way. Another more dramatic theory alleges that the Mongols changed the river course to deprive the fortress defenders of water. There are towers between the fortress walls. The distance between them roughly equals a narrow flight. Riddle me this. Near the fortress wall, about 100 meters away, the whole field is covered with ceramic fragments. How did these broken pots get here? There is a theory that during the fortress assault, its defenders catapulted pots with boiling oil or resin over the attackers. Who knows? It might have simply been the city dump. Nations come and go, but the land stays forever. Once there were noisy markets here, and now everything is overgrown with Saksaul, and the only local inhabitants are gazelles. Nature activists are trying to ensure that 1,000 years from now, our descendants will see the animals and plants that our distant ancestors saw 1,000 years ago. Saksaul forests have absorbed the ancient city. Sands have covered former gardens and fields, yet the remains of the ancient irrigation system are detectable from a bird's-eye view. The OutdoorKZ team will try to find the channel via which they supplied water from the Otasu River. This looks like some channel. Let's see where it will lead us. Hey guys, I think we found it. This is the Otasu channel. And here is the Diversion Canal going to the fortress. The fortress is only 3 kilometers away. This embankment is made of clay. This canal looks like it's man-made. People dug it here. While digging the canal, they simply dumped the soil here. Looking at Karamegan from the height of 500 meters, one can notice something looking like fields a little off to the side. Some building remains are whitening at a distance. Let's go and check them out. 6 kilometers away from the fortress, on the shore of the Shat-Bakhash, there is an ancient cemetery and some buildings. Perhaps they were used as dwellings. Some of their elements are made of turanga, the generic local name for blue poplar. Apparently, people lived here back in the days when the Kapchagai-Balkhash was still full of water, and poplar groves covered its banks. This is an ancient burial site. It's destroyed almost completely. There are some later burials over there. Let's go and have a look. These walls are in a better shape than the fortress. It looks like the burials were organized at a later time. But it's still quite old. The OutdoorKZ team decides to examine the Dry Riverbed in more detail. See the depression here? And the vegetation is totally different. These spiniferous bushes are chingyl. See how many tracks are here? I hope there are no tigers here and we'll manage a boar somehow. You know what? It does look like a nice tiger habitat. Imagine a tiger attacking you. Wow. Where do you think we are? In the Amazon jungle? No, we are in the middle of the Sari-Yasik Atirau Desert, at the dry bed of the Balkhash River. Over there, do you see? Some ancient buildings. That's what it was. You know, Rustam, I'm looking at these wooden elements and I'm somewhat confused. We need to consult with experts when we come back to the city. They are most certainly old, but they are definitely not 700 years old. But they are made of poplar, and people had clearly lived here when water was still flowing down the Kapchagai-Balkhash. Can it be that we somewhat exaggerated the time when the Ili had changed its course? Walking along the banks of the old bed of the Kapchagai-Balkhash a little longer, one could probably find even more exciting artifacts. But we need to think about night shelter. After a couple of extreme nights in the steppe, we have a chance to sleep in more comfortable conditions. We are now at the border of the Kapchagai-Balkhash Ecological Corridor and the Ili-Balkhash Nature Reserve. The checkpoint/ranger center is located right on the border. The Karamegan Ranger Center is a nice manifestation of modern energy-efficient technologies. It is fitted with off-grid wind and solar generators. In such a yurt, it's warm and cozy even in the most severe steppe snowstorm. Our expedition is almost over. We can rest and organize the materials collected. Getting ready for this trip, our crew feared that the winter desert landscapes would be too bleak and monotonous, but these fears haven't panned out. No doubt, the winter desert is not as bright as the tropical jungle, but traveling through it is no less fascinating. It's full of secrets and mysteries. In the course of our trip, we have passed through two corridors, the ecological and the time corridors. This great steppe corridor, along which armies, caravans and new ideas moved, proved inseparable from the ecological one, along which wild animals migrate. Once again, we got convinced that nature and history are inseparable. The OutdoorKZ team is always trying to find and demonstrate the links between them. The more we learn, the better we understand how little we still know about our nature and our history.